In my new cohort around the nation, the sending of a British naval expedition to recover the islands was mostly greeted with mirth and incredulity. Surely this wasn't serious. The British mood wouldn't outlast the shipping home of the first body bag, a term that was to become more wearisome to me with each passing year. At first, I tried opportunistically to accommodate this mentality and split the difference, and even wrote an editorial mocking the Rule Britannia jingoism that seemed to be spoiling the show back home. My cheeks still inflame a bit to remember it, and then Alexander Chancellor, editor of The Spectator, gave me a call. His correspondent in Washington, an otherwise lovely man, was also having trouble taking the thing seriously and was filing copy that was frankly a bit flip. Would I mind surging down to the Capitol and seeing if I could hold the fort for a while? I didn't hesitate. Never mind its ostensible Toryism. Chancellor's Spectator had been outpacing my old stable at the New Statesman for some while. Recruiting some of the latter's best talents, it was a distinction even to be asked. I was soon on the shuttle for what was really my first ever Washington assignment. It was a tremendous introduction to the class and empire dichotomies I mentioned above. On the one side was the very ugliest bit of the new American empire, represented by Haig-Kirkpatrick alliance of uniformed bullies and power-sucking pseudo-intellectuals. They spoke for the Argentine torturers who were, as they then well knew but we did not, already acting as the herders and trainers for a homicidal crew that the world would soon know as the Nicaraguan Contras. It really counts as an irony of history that it was Miss Thatcher's bellicosity that robbed the neocons of their favorite proxy, compelling the then unknown Oliver North to finance the Contras from hostage trading with the Iranian mullahs instead, and very nearly demolishing the presidency of her adored Ronnie. On the opposing side stood the most traditional and apparently superannuated, but also in a way the classiest bit of the old British Empire, given a near-ideal embodiment, in this case by Sir Nicholas Nico Henderson, lodged as he was in a spacious ambassadorial residence designed by Sir Edwin Lutyens, architect of New Delhi, on the Great Western sweep of Massachusetts Avenue. I dare say that many Foreign Office types, like many Foreign Office types, Sir Nicholas had his doubts about the prudence of sending the Royal Navy so far from home base on an obscure point of principle. But I can testify that it took him about 3 days to knock the creepy Argentine envoy right off the court and hound him from decent Georgetown society. A tubercular shoulder in youth had given Nico a hard time getting dressed in the morning. He was always well turned out, but just very slightly rumpled, and was by this stage in his life described as looking a bit like a ruined country house. This he regarded as no insult. Indeed, he undoubtedly made good use of the way in which it caused superficial characters to underestimate him. By judicious leaking, he also managed to make La Kirkpatrick and her associates look rather unsavory, and by calling in a number of markers, he induced Caspar Weinberger to throw the Defense Department onto the British side of the scale. I didn't care for Weinberger either, or for what I regarded as the American cult of Winston Churchill that he represented. But for me the main objective couldn't be in doubt. At all costs, the United States should not salvage yet another filthy Latin American quadrillo. Eventually Reagan sided with Weinberger and Thatcher against Haig and Kirkpatrick, and Argentina itself was liberated along with the tiny British archipelago it had tried to steal. I could not have had a better introduction to Washington and its power struggles. He might have done the right thing on that occasion, but I did not at all like Ronald Reagan. And nobody then could persuade me that I should. Even now, when I squint back at him through the more roseate lens of his historic compromise with Gorbachev, I can easily remember, which is precisely why one's memoirs must always strive to avoid too much retrospective lens adjustment, exactly why I found him so rebarbative at the time. There was first his appallingly facile manner as a liar. He could fix the camera with a falsky smirk, and I always found annoying, but that got him called the great communicator by a chorus of toadies in the press, and proceed to utter the most resounding untruths. South Africa has stood beside us in every major political war we have fought, he declared, while defending a regime whose party leadership had been locked up by the British for pro-Nazi sympathies in the Second World War. The Russian language contains no word for freedom, was another stupefying pronouncement of his. Who knows where he got it from? Or who can imagine a president whose staff couldn't tell him of the noble word svoboda? On 2 separate occasions, he claimed that, having never quite fit the safety of Los Angeles movie backlots, he had been present for the liberation of the Nazi death camps. It could get worrying. Up close at press conferences, the carapace of geniality proved to be flaky. I was once within a few feet of his lizard-like face when he was asked a question that he didn't care for, about the theft of President Carter's briefing book by Reagan campaign operatives during the 1980 election, and found myself quite shaken by the look of a senile, shifty malice that came into his eyes as he offered the excuse that the New York Times had also accepted stolen property in the case of the Pentagon Papers. Nobody was less surprised than I when Reagan was later found to be suffering from Alzheimer's disease. I believe it will one day be admitted that some of his family and 1 or 2 of his physicians had begun to suspect this as early as his first term. The leader of the free world was frequently photographed in the company of end-times Protestant fundamentalists and biblical literalists like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson. Tethered gas balloons of greed and cynicism, once written up by Martin Amis as frauds of Chaucerian proportions, the president found time to burble with such characters about the fulfillment of ancient prophecy and the coming apocalypse. He also speculated drivelingly that the jury might yet return an open verdict on the theory of evolution. He was married to a woman who employed a White House astrologer. He said that the Abraham Lincoln Battalion had fought on the wrong side in the Civil War in Spain, which logically meant that there had been a right side and that it was the Francoist one. When the last attempt at a fascist coup was made in Spain in the early 1980s, the Reagan administration was asked for comment, again in the person of Strangelovian freak Alexander Haig, who flabbergastingly said that the armed attack on Spain's elected parliament was a purely internal Spanish affair. With Haig, Reagan also gave permission to the Menachem Begin and Ariel Sharon to invade Lebanon in 1982, and to make their incursion as far as Beirut to do the dirty work of the Catholic phalange. In order to gratify Chancellor Helmut Kohl of West Germany, Reagan agreed to visit the SS cemetery in Berberg. Ich bin ein Berliner. Oh, ich bin ein Bitburger. As if that in itself was not bad enough, to declare that those interred there were not just victims, but victims just as much as the civilians they had slaughtered. He made stupid, alarming on-air jokes about preemptively bombing the USSR. He pardoned the convicted FBI agents Felt and Miller, who had been prosecuted and fired for illegal break-ins and wiretaps directed at the anti-war movement. In a really sweet irony, one of these men, Mark Felt, as I was to learn, had been the deep throat whose torpedoes had sent the previous elected Republican administrators to the floor of the sea.